Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. And I'm very pleased to see there are many people in the room despite the tape and the social distancing. And also welcome for all the other attendees on Zooms to this session at QIMR Berghofer, this event for International Women's Day. And I believe the event will be recorded. Before I start, I would like to first acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara people who are the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would like to pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. And also would like to extend the acknowledgement and welcome to Indigenous Australians and Torres Strait Islanders joining us today. So this year's International Women's Day theme is Choose to Challenge. However, at QIMR Berghofer today, we've decided to focus more on a particular aspect of the career of women in a medical research institute, whether you're in research or in the professional group, which is Motherhood and Career. And we chose it to call it Mission Possible. And I'm sure you're going to hear a lot about Mission Possible today. In fact, we have living examples of Mission Possible sitting on stage today. So let me first introduce the panel. And I would like to thank them first for coming and participating in this panel today. So our guest is Professor Ranjit Singh, who's at the Diamantina Institute, and she's the Arthritis Queensland Chair of Rheumatology. I've known Ranjit for many years, always admired Ranjit as an incredibly accomplished clinician and world-class scientist and immunologist. So it's going to be very interesting to hear what Ranjit has to say about her career so far. The second panelist is Professor Georgia Schnevik-Strange, as you know, a femme extraordinaire in French. Senior scientist, well-renowned geneticist, who is the coordinator of the Genetics and Computational Biology Department and head of Cancer Genetics. Professor Rachel Neal, a very accomplished group leader and deputy coordinator of the Population Health Department. Vanessa Beasley, a rising star associate professor, behavioral scientist with an interest in cancer survivorship, particular gynecological cancer. And last but not least, Julia Little, marketing manager in the external relation team at QIMR Berghofer. So welcome all, and thank you very much for being here and sharing with us your experience as women with a career and also mothers. I forgot to say, by the way, that Ranjini has 3 children, one 25 and twins 21. Georgia has 2 adult daughters, same with Rachel. And I believe Vanessa has 2 young children, mid-age, 9 and 7 years old, twins. Yeah, so 3 children actually. And Julia, Julia's got young children from 2 and 4. That's an age that's very trying, so it's going to be interesting to hear about what's happening there. So what I'm going to do first is ask each of you from left to right to give a short overview of what your career has been so far and tell us, what have been the key opportunities that have led to the progress of your career and also the key challenges. So Ranjini is first, and she's brought a slide.
It's a very big slide because it's been a long career already, and you can see lots of steps on the way. So on the top right is me, my first day of school, and just below that is with my mum. And then in my medical school year, and then graduating, and then renovating our first house. And that's when we were about to leave to go to the US for a fellowship in rheumatology. And so that was from 1990. And on the left there, you can see us on a conference in California. And then I came back to Brisbane and got my first job. And without, unbeknownst to me, I was pregnant as I started my first job. And then my Sylvie was born, and there we are on a conference together in Italy, having lunch outside the conference room. And John and Sylvie were having a great time, and they invited me for lunch after I'd given my talk. And so then I had twins in 1999, and you can see them there, and I was confined during my pregnancy for 3 weeks at the Mater, and so the lab meetings used to be around the hospital bed because there was no other way to do it. We didn't have Zoom in those days. Probably wouldn't have done that. Now it wouldn't be allowed in a hospital even. And there you can see in those days I was doing some fundamental science and preclinical research in immunology, and I filed my first patent in 2002, and that's what the black swan is for, and that's for a talk for another day. And there you can see I got into helping out at the primary school in science classes, and at the very bottom you can't see it, but there's some steps and there's some forests, and I really just wanted to get across that my career has been ups and downs through wilderness and through forests, and walking the journey of a career. It's never been straight through a straight way and everything's green and easy, and walking through those difficult and nice parts with family. So here is a very nice picture of my son walking through a door in Tasmania, where you don't know where that door is going to lead, but you go anyway, and then you bring others with you and you kind of support each other as you go on the journey. So I really like that photo. And then this here is a valley with no greenery, and that's the Valley of Death. And I think a lot of us know what the Valley of Death is, and it's not just about commercialisation, but in my case it really was the Valley of Death after a patent and then not getting funding, and being very, very persistent about staying in the game, not giving up, and looking after the family at the same time and trying to build a career while you're trying to build your family, and they're growing, and then walking through these narrow paths through the biotech and formulation clinical trials. And by this stage, people are graduating, so you kind of get through those difficult years, and then people come out the other end and they're actually successful, and you think, wow, how did that happen? And then try to get to the promised land, which is right at the very top, and that's a picture in Morocco of the Blue City. And all the while, in the middle is the inspiration for why we do these really difficult things, and that's for the patients. So I think I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Ranjit. This is pretty inspiring. What about Georgia? Tell us, what's the story?
So I came in here in 1986 as a postdoc, my first postdoc, and effectively had no supervisor for sort of complicated reasons. But I had my children in 1988 and 1991. I would say it's the best thing I've ever done. Don't hesitate. If you want to have children, don't be put off by the challenges ahead. It's absolutely worth it. At the end of a shitty day when your paper's rejected, your grant's rejected, at least you go home and give them a bath and have great fun. And it gets only better and easier as they get older. Make sure they start emptying the dishwasher as soon as they're able. Rope them in. I think it's actually a really good role model for children. I mean, let's face it, who in the future is going to be able to afford a house on one salary? So if you want to have kids, you've got to be a working mother. And interesting, my daughters both completely see that. They say their school friends who had mothers who stay at home want to stay at home, but probably won't be able to afford it. So I think it's a really important role model. I got my first fellowship in 1992, so just after I had my second child. There's no doubt about it, it impacted on my productivity. There was a period when there's somebody at QIMR at a very similar stage for myself, and I noticed he had 10 more papers than I did. I thought, I'll bugger it. But I've got 2 children, and at the end of the day, I know what I'd rather have, 2 kids or 10 papers. But it particularly impacts if you're doing wet lab work. I mean, some people manage to do both, like Stacey here, but you've got to be really efficient. You've got to be able to time your day precisely to get out the door on time. When they were little, I didn't work ever on Sundays because I wanted to spend time with them, and that no doubt slowed things down a bit. They went into childcare at about 4 or 5 months, just locally here at the ECHA. That was very good, having them both close by, and Nick and I could both drop them off and pick them up. I think we had to collect them by 5, which I actually think was a good thing because we had to get home quite early and have the evening together. The biggest challenge by far, I think, wasn't those years when they're in childcare, 52 weeks a year if you want, but the school holidays, particularly the school holidays once they got fed up with going to any kind of after-school care. And there I was very dependent on a fabulous group of friends who all had kids the same age and most of whom didn't work full-time. And I would take a day off and have 5 children and then farm mine off for the rest of the week. And they had a great time, and they've all remained friends still, as have the parents, which is perhaps more amazing. And the other essential ingredient is a cleaner. I've had the same cleaner for 34 years. I worked out she probably costs about $5,000 a year, which in the scheme of things, when you think what you spend on a mortgage, on a car, is actually fairly trivial. I would say borrow more money if you need. If you're borrowing $500,000 for a mortgage, an extra $20,000 for a cleaner doesn't make much difference. And that, I'm sure, has saved our marriage. So go for it.
Thank you, Joan. That's really great. Now, Rachel.
So I actually graduated as a vet and worked for a short time in vet science before deciding that that was not me, embarked on my PhD. And my supervisor threatened me with my life if I got pregnant before I completed my PhD. So I submitted my PhD, took off for a gap year, didn't do it between school and uni, so I decided that was the time to do it. So we went off and had a gap year. I did a little bit of work as a visiting scientist at Cambridge University during that year while we did various travels, dealt with my PhD corrections, and then came home pregnant. And my PhD was awarded 3 days before my baby was born. I then am possibly a little bit unusual in that I worked, I took 7 months maternity leave after that before returning to work as a project manager. Had another baby a couple of years later, took another extended period of maternity leave, continued to work part-time, and in fact quite part-time, 40 to 60%. But I was then very lucky to be awarded an NHMRC postdoctoral fellowship when baby number 2 was about 2. So me and my husband and 2 little girls took off to go and live in Oxford for 2 years where I worked full-time. So I was incredibly lucky to have that opportunity, and I really made the most of it. But then I came home and continued to work part-time for the next 7 years, 60 to 80%. And I think with a lack of extended family support around, it would have been really, really, really difficult for me to work full-time. So it wasn't until my youngest finished primary school that I worked full-time. But I was really fortunate when I returned to Australia that I was well mentored to get a quite large, at the time, NHMRC grant. It was just under $1 million as CIA to lead a project. And that's really what launched my career, was getting that project up and running, because that sort of gave me a springboard to do other things. So I juggled working part-time plus leading a big project. And look, it took, I don't know that I've ever quite caught up. It definitely held me back, but I wouldn't trade that experience and having those kids for being further ahead in my career at this point in time.
Very good. Thank you, Rachel. How about Vanessa?
So I'm a senior research officer, and I'm 11 years full-time equivalent post-PhD, which is 14 years of actual time post-PhD. I was very fortunate. About a year after my PhD, I was awarded an early career fellowship from NHMRC. And then about a year after that, I fell pregnant with my first child, who was a singleton. And I took 6 months maternity leave, and then I went back to work 3 days and then 4 days a week. Then I fell pregnant about a year after that with twins. Surprise! So before you ask, no, twins don't run in the family. They were MCDA twins, meaning that they were sharing an egg, and they were high risk. It was a high-risk pregnancy. So they came at just 30 weeks. They weighed under 1 kilo and just over 1 kilo. As soon as they were out of my body, it was a minute before they were hooked up to every single machine that you can imagine and put into a glass box. And then we spent 14 weeks in hospital. After that, we were in and out of hospital for years. So it was a really tough time. The good thing was that NHMRC could extend my fellowship in time. So I went from having a 4-year full-time fellowship to a 6-year fellowship, still being paid the same amount from that fellowship, but spreading it out over 6 years. So that was really helpful. Plus I got the maternity leave from the Institute and the government. So I do really recommend that as a time to have kids or to consider having kids. And then after my fellowship, I went on year-to-year contracts for about 5 years, which, let me tell you, is really, really difficult for an early career, mid-career person, because you're always planning all these grants that you might get, but also all these exit strategies out of science, because you're not sure if you're going to have a job for the next year. And that's really tiring on anyone. It's tiring on the kids as well, not knowing where they're going to, move to, what they're going to do. But last year, very fortunately, I received my first major national grant. So I have 3 years, it funds part of my salary, so I have 3 years of security with that. I have a great project to sink my teeth into now, and I have 3 relatively healthy primary school age children now.
Wow, great story of resilience.
That's a really hard act to follow. That's
Julia.
amazing. My story is obviously a little bit different. I'm a marketing professional. I graduated with journalism and business management degrees and went straight into marketing at Microsoft in Sydney after university about 15 years ago now. So I worked in Sydney for a while. I wanted to follow my boyfriend at the time overseas to New York after a few years in Sydney. So I moved to New York and got a job with Microsoft's advertising agency. And you may have all watched Mad Men about how male-dominated and crazy that industry was. And I will say that it's all true. So I literally worked on Madison Avenue for a few years. It was around about the time of the GFC, so advertising used to have the long lunches and the luxurious client budgets and maybe one client to look after, but by the time I was an account supervisor at an advertising agency in New York, things were pretty grim, where we had portfolios of multiple clients and very, very, very demanding. It was a hyper-pressure environment to the point where I think people really got off on the adrenaline of it. And for a few years in my 20s, it was quite a novelty and quite exciting and almost a bit of ego to say to friends, no, I can't come to your birthday party on the weekend. I've got a TV commercial due on Monday. I can't. But after a couple of years, I really did start to physically and mentally burn out to the point where I was making myself sick and feeling quite panicky, doing too many client presentations, too many pitches, and just too much at stake. And a lot of the clients in this environment as well, because you are client services, you can never say no. You have to say yes. That was probably the one rule of advertising, was you have to say yes. You know, for example, one client rang me once at 6 p.m. and said, I've got my annual review the next day and I need to get my bonus. So I need that report on my desk in my email by 9 a.m. When I met someone good enough to marry and was thinking about my future and having children, I thought, I can't do this. I just don't have it in me. I can't cope with this high pressure anymore and these sorts of hours, and I don't want to be sacrificing nights and weekends. And also my husband's career was my fiance at that point, his career was taking off, so something had to give, and it was me. So I decided to get out of advertising agency and client services in general and go in-house. So I went in-house to a marketing manager role. I had my first baby in the US. I'm sure you've all heard it's pretty lackluster with maternity leave. It really depends on the size of the company that you're working for. I was lucky that my company was head officed in London, so we did get some maternity leave because of that, but the London employees got a year, we got 8 weeks. So I took 8 weeks and 4 weeks sick leave and all my vacation, which was 10 days vacation, and put my son in daycare at 12 weeks. I was lucky, I will say the daycare was in the bottom of the building, so I could go and breastfeed throughout the day, but it was very tough, and they're certainly not set up for return to work mums. No childcare subsidy, which we're blessed with here. And I used to express milk in the server room because there was nowhere for mums to go and do that. So after a couple of years, well, actually about a year trying to manage that, we decided to move back to Brisbane. I wanted to have more kids. My parents were getting older, various reasons. So went back to Brisbane and got a job here in the external relations team as a marketing manager. And it was amazing difference having my second son here because I got the 12 months maternity leave. So that was brilliant, and got to come back 4 days a week, which was good. And I've just started back 5 days last week and collapsed on Saturday. But yeah, so, but I agree with Georgia. The cleaner hasn't saved my marriage yet, but I'm hoping they'll pull through. So I think that definitely helps. But
Thank you, Julia. This is fantastic. As you can see, we worry about grants and the difficulty of juggling career when we're scientists, and we forget about the other world that is equally brutal in some places for professional women trying to have a career in a particular profession. I'm going to start asking questions, and I'll start with Ranjit just again from left to right. Now, Ranjini, you get a really inspiring and uplifting presentation about a pretty amazing career so far. And, you know, when you think about being a clinician scientist, it's hard enough when you know you have to care for patients and do your research and have a family. And you mentioned the fact that sometimes you get very disheartened by the fact you don't get grants, and it puts a lot of pressure on you. But what kind of support did you get around you to really help you keep going and continue and persevere?
I think mentors are really important, and I don't just mean formal mentoring programs. I mean people that you meet who inspire you by their persistence and their ability and their career and their wisdom, and just to chat with them over breakfast or have a coffee and just to understand how other people do it. Also just to walk in other people's shoes and realize that yours might be hard, but other people are doing it as well. So I think it's good to sometimes stop thinking so much about your own problems and to understand other people's. Like Georgia, you know, I really believe that it takes a village to raise a child, and we definitely, my husband and I always, you know, shared the child raising. I think I really did have to educate him so that he understood what it was like for me as a woman, because although you have your own perspective, until someone actually tells you what it's like to be in their shoes and to try to run the career, and you know, and the real competition that we face if we fail, and why we feel like we're failing all the time because it's so competitive. So I think that once we kind of got that straight, he was happy to take over where I told him I couldn't keep going. And so he allowed me to travel and looked after the kids when I was away, and talking to my daughter in the car and asking her what things did she miss when she was growing up. She said she missed me when I travelled a lot. She said she doesn't think about it that much. It's something, when I ask her, that's what she missed. But what did she gain? And she gained someone that she feels really continues to inspire her and inspired her as a child. And I said, what was inspiring? And was it, you know, or is it daunting to have someone who's achieving to be your inspiration? She said, I don't think about the achievements. I just think about you as a person. You're inspiring because of the way you face challenges. So I think that's the kind of mentor you want, is someone who's going to help you get through your challenges and not tell you how to do it, but show you how they might have done it.
It's very great comments, and it's very important. And it made me think of my own journey with my son. I did ask him, you know, did you ever miss me? Did you ever resented the fact that I work full time? And he said, no, Mum, I admire you. I could talk about you at school, you know, it was pretty special. And only that, you allowed me to order $200 of Indian food on Uber Eats, so that was fantastic. So I think this is also, you teach them resilience, and I think that's part of that as well. So now I'm going to move on Georgia. And Georgia, your gorgeous look are deceptive. I know you've been in this business for a number of years. I won't say how many. But do you think things have progressed for women in research, in the journey that you've observed being a researcher? And do you think there's still unmet needs that needs to be tackled?
Yeah, I think there's been huge progress. I think genetics is an unusual field because it's actually always been very female dominated, always from the very beginning. And maybe we'd say the same for public health. But I mean, clearly the things that are improved are maternity leave. I was the first person. When I had my first child, I asked the director about maternity leave And he gave me a big wink and said, "You'll be working from home, won't you?" And he just kept paying. But I was the first person to get official maternity leave, so that's a huge advancement. Or other things like our mother's bonus is a huge advancement. The whole idea of years of opportunity and years lost to maternity leave is much, much better recognised. I think it's not quite well enough recognised because people take out the 6 months you're on leave and they don't really recognise that for the next 12 years you can't work so hard. So I think, frankly, they should at least double that. But I think it's got immeasurably better, and I think we'll see with time much more equality in terms of men and women at the top of the tree in science in Australia. There's still the usual challenges of having to divide your time. Nobody can give you the time back, but I think at least they take more allowance for that, make things a little bit easier.
So if I may ask Georgia, having a husband, just without disclosing, Georgia is married to a very eminent scientist at QIMR Berghofer, Nick Martin. Do you think that helps, having a husband
huge.
in the profession?
Huge. I mean, because he understood, of course, what the challenges were. It meant we sometimes had the same deadlines, which was a little bit challenging, but I think you don't have to be married to somebody in the field, but you certainly have to have a partner who's understanding and who can pick up the load when you need it and who'll take care of the kids when you travel. I did my first lawn conference when my first daughter was about 6 months old, and although he'd always been a good father, there's nothing like leaving them completely alone for a week for them to really, get it all down tap. And I think it's a huge advantage of working women that the fathers, as Ranjini says, become far more involved and become much more equal parents. I think it's a really, really good outcome. But even when they were sort of 12 and 15, I would travel and people say, "Well, who's looking after your children?" So my husband, of course. I mean, who do you think? You think at 15 I need to buy a babysitter? And, maybe he didn't do things quite like I wanted and spoiled them rotten, but, at the end of the day, it didn't really matter.
That's very good. So I'll move on to Rachel. So Rachel, you did mention the timing of the birth of your first child, I think just a few days before finishing your PhD. Do you think there's a good time to have a child when you're a researcher? Do you think there's better timing for this, or do you think you just don't think about it, just do it?
Yeah, look, I don't think that there's any time that's necessarily better than any other time. Like, the reality is that it's going to have an impact no matter when you do it. Having said that, I think one of the things that helped me was working part-time, because it actually meant that my fellowship, as Vanessa said, got extended. And it's not like I was only working the 60% that I was supposedly working. I was working more than that. But it gave me a longer time to actually get some publications and things out, which then put me in a much better position to get my next NHMRC fellowship and grants and things like that. So I kind of really leveraged the part-time thing to give me a longer period to work. So no, I don't think this is a perfect time, unless your PhD supervisor is threatening you with your life, and then you probably shouldn't do it while you're doing it.
Or get a new supervisor.
Which is, this is the behavior in itself is questionable. This is a personal decision, and I think...
I'm only joking. She didn't really.
Okay.
She did it in a joking way.
She did in a joking way. Yeah, we're all very nervous when it comes to that. Now, Vanessa, you had twins, following one child and then twins. Do you ever felt guilty sometimes being at work and leaving them behind with, childcare or whatever you use to take care of them?
I know that a lot of women do feel guilty. It's not a thing that I feel. And maybe I'm heartless.
No.
But I feel like I have done the best I can possibly do for my children and balanced my life with science. And if anything, if I was going to feel any guilt, it would be in relation to my eldest, because when the twins were in and out of hospital and really high demand, I did put him in childcare, probably more than he could handle at that stage. And because of that, he has struggled with anxiety because he just hasn't had that connection, and it's been a very stressful time in his younger life. But do I feel guilty about it? I understand why he is like he is, but I can't say I actually feel guilty for it.
Okay. So how did you manage work-life balance? I mean, obviously you have a husband or partner. Do you think that that's important and the contribution was, as you think that was critical or could have been better, or, sometimes
Yeah,
depends?
so I have an amazing husband. He does more than his fair share of the childcare and the housework, and without him, I would not be here as a scientist. There's a few reasons I'm here. He's one of them. I never went back to work full time, and I don't see myself going back to work full time possibly until high school. We also had au pairs who helped when the kids were younger. And we have a cleaner, as George has mentioned. And my kids are now primary school age kids, so they're expected to contribute to the household as well. So it's not just mum and dad doing those jobs at home. They are doing jobs alongside us. So that's how we balance everything. And it might be I do all the mornings drop-offs and my husband does the afternoon drop-offs. We just make it work to our strengths.
So Vanessa, do you think that if I had to take a battle to help someone like you trying to grow a career in medical research, what's currently missing and what would be very useful? And I'm asking to everybody actually, what would be really useful?
I was so pleased to hear when you announced at the staff meeting the other day that there would be a possibility of 5 years funding for early career people, because that is the hardest thing. I think when you don't have any certainty there, you spend a lot of your mind power planning exit strategies, planning business ideas, like thinking about how am I going to live after this year if you're living on a year-to-year contract. The other thing about being on a year-to-year contract is that you're not eligible for the seeding funding from QIMR. You can't apply for the seeding funding. So how do you get ahead if you can't get a small project up and running to then get a bigger project? So having some security financially, I think, is an amazing step forward.
Yeah, it's a good point here. I'll move on to Julia. So Julia, I'm glad you mentioned Mad Men, because it's exactly what I was thinking when I was thinking of you being in the marketing world, and I realized you were in New York right in the middle of it. I was quite shocked to hear that it hasn't progressed very much since the 1960s, which is. Do you think it's the same in Australia? Do you think that the mentality is the same? Do you think that in the private sector, in marketing and communication here in Australia, there are more discussion around work-life balance and motherhood at the workplace?
I think definitely. I've got quite a few friends who work in finance, and from what they're saying is that these companies are actually using work-life balance and good maternity leave and good policies to actually recruit talented women straight from university, and it's very competitive, particularly with roles in banks and things like that. I think client services, so things like law firms, accounting firms, ad agencies, will always be difficult. I've heard horrible stories about friends at accounting firms overhearing conversations from male partners saying that they don't like promoting women to manager because as soon as women get manager, they go and have children. So I think there's definitely, people are still making comments like that, but I think it's definitely changing. I think the work from home policy is helping. I think that, from my perspective, at the moment I feel like I've nailed the daycare thing, got that down to a fine art finally. But for me, I'm starting to think about my eldest son, Spencer, starts prep next year. My husband works very long hours. He's gone before I get up. He's not home until, conveniently, the kids are in bed, or I leave them up sometimes just to punish him so he can deal with it. So I've got to start having a conversation and thinking about, well, who's picking up the kids? Is it after school care? He's a very sensitive child as well, and I'm conscious of that as well. Does he need me in the afternoons? I love my career and want to progress my career as much as possible. So I've got to start having those conversations and thoughts about how we're going to make that work, or move to Sweden where they match work hours with school hours.
So I'm going to move back to Ranjini, and as you know, it's difficult we're getting more and more difficulty attracting clinician scientists to embrace research career. Do you think it's more difficult for women than men if you look at it, and your junior researchers around you are clinicians?
Really, most of the ones that I attract are actually female, and one of the questions that you prompted us with before today was whether it's particularly difficult in science as a woman to succeed, and I think we've just said that it's not just science. There's difficult in medicine as well. I mean, it's a client-based profession, and you have to work on call, and I'm sure that if I'd worked full-time as a clinician, I would never have achieved what I've done as a clinician scientist. So many women, I think, are looking at the type of role model they see as a clinician scientist and thinking, well, this is not so bad, and I might go and try my hand at research because it actually looks like quite a good option. And while it's not easy, it's certainly, you can regulate your hours as an academic and as a scientist, and you don't have to take that next project. You don't have to write that grant. It's a self-drive that makes us try to do all these things. And you really have to, I mean, for me, at all stages of my career, I've had to look at, well, what's the scope of my life at the moment? What is it I really need to do? What can I pull back on? Because you're always capable of so much more, but you don't have to do it. So I think it's always, in terms of the one-year contract, yeah, it's good to think plan B, and I've thought plan B all along. And I could never go back to full-time clinical, so it was always, okay, business idea, or, what else could I do, chef? There's plenty of ideas. Luckily, I never had to take them because I love what I do. But I can always scale back and reduce my ambition and actually put my energy into something that I could achieve which is of lower scope. So that's why I really wanted to show the journey. It's not about the massive achievement that you think you might do when you're 3 years old.
Thank you, Ranjini. So, Georgia, have you ever doubted that this career was for you, or have you always persevered?
Well, I couldn't because I had no other options. I've got no other skills. Absolutely none. There was a year when I was really, really worried about getting my fellowship, and somebody said, what will you do if you don't get it? And I said, I'll throw myself on the director's floor and refuse to leave till he gives me a salary. That was Laurie. Luckily, I didn't have to do that. No, I mean, I've had my salary from an HMRC since 1992. There have been many years when I thought that wouldn't happen, and I've been in a cold sweat. Having a husband with a more secure position was a huge plus. I mean, if worst came to the worst, we could have survived for a while. But no, I've never had a plan B.
Okay, well, passion is passion, when you have one love, that's what it is. Rachel, we never talk much about this, but what advice would you give to a single mum?
Look, I haven't been a single mum, and I do have friends who have been single mums, but not in science. I don't know how they do it. I think single mums are extraordinary with what they achieve, because my sort of secret weapon is my awesome husband. Like Vanessa's secret weapon, we both have Johns, and we think Johns are good.
Nick's going to be good too.
John too.
No.
Yeah, so,
marry a John and then you'll be fine. But look, I guess for me, the thing that's been really important, and probably the thing that I also, I have PhD students and staff who have young children, and I'm very pro work-life balance, actually, because I don't want people burnt out, because I've put so much pressure on to achieve the entire time. And I think we get more out of people if they're feeling good and happy and positive in their careers. So I think that work-life balance is really important. And the one thing that I would say that I wish I had done a little bit differently when my kids were younger is put less focus on, I think when you're trying to juggle a job and family and a house and you don't have much support, you sort of say, I've got to get this done, I've got to get that done. And I wish that I had just gone, you know what? I actually didn't have a cleaner a lot of the time. I wish I'd just gone, that's not important, let's just have some fun. So when my time was, free, instead of going, look, get your shoes on, do your homework, unpack the dishwasher, that I was just going, hey, let's play a game. Let's go to the park. Like, let's just have more fun in the time I had available to me, which is hard to achieve, because then if the washing doesn't get done, no one's got uniforms and it all
falls apart at the seams a bit.
But I do think prioritising work-life balance and making sure that you have some fun is really important.
Yeah, I think it's very good advice. So, Vanessa,
Vanessa,
do you want
can
to
I
say
add
something?
to the answer on that question? But in my experience, when my children were all very young, I put a call out on Facebook and said, can anybody come and help me on a Saturday? And over the course of a year, I had every Saturday booked up with someone, might have been a distant friend or a relative or whatever. Every Saturday we had help. And those Saturdays I would either sneak off and write a few parts of a paper or go to sleep, whatever I needed at the time. And so that gave me the ability just to reclaim some time back when I really, really needed it. And I think in society we don't ask for help enough. Oftentimes people are very willing to help us, but we have this thought that we're failing or something if we are asking for help. But in actual fact, I think it is a strength we should all utilise.
I think that's a really interesting idea. I think somebody gave me a tip when we were both medically locked down this year. Ask lots of people at the same time. So somebody might be able to volunteer. If you ask one friend, they sort of feel obliged to help and it's not necessarily convenient. Put it on Facebook and somebody will say, oh yeah, I'm free on Saturday, that'll be fun. Very good idea.
Best thing about having twins, and I have twins too, is that you learn to ask for help because you're outnumbered. The two of you are outnumbered. You've already got one child, you've now got three. You've got three, you need three hands and you don't have it.
Yes, but can I add to that and say that at some point my husband said, we need to stop asking people for help, Vanessa. We've milked this long enough. And then another friend said to me, if you need help, you always ask. Help there's no expiry date on asking for help. And so I took her advice and not my husband's.
Thank you. And now, before we go to have a breakfast outside, I would like you to join me and thank those beautiful women sitting here. And I hope they inspired you because they inspired me very much. Thank you very much.